most agencies say, we're trying to come in and we're going to show them how great we are. We're going to show them that we're amazing and all the work that we do and all this. So probably, I think the stats say approximately 70% of agency pitches are them talking about themselves. It's the worst thing you could do.
Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome Grant Gooding. Grant is the founder of Proof, which is a research company, and they provide basically all sorts of research exclusively on neuroscience and math to measure emotions, motivations, and preferences of customers and show you basically what you need to say to different segments to move them forward, to create engagement. And one thing we'll dig into is specifically to win pitches when that's a need. So Grant, great to have you on the show.
Dan, thank you very much. It's very sexy when you say it like that.
I think it actually is. I sense a little sarcasm, but I actually think that the research element is going to become bigger, especially as agencies needing to have a perspective is becoming more important, right? So it's not just like you can say, hey, we're going to go build your website or we're going to run these campaigns, because that's becoming fast commoditized. So I actually do think it's sexy. And with that, I want to dig into your background a little bit in a second. I know I said that before we threw on the recorder, I'd said I'd lead with that, but I actually want to get to the situation on the ground a little bit. And let's say you have a client and they're like, hey, we have this pitch and it's a must win. What's that like? Like when they call you, what are they actually missing? And what are some of the things you might be helping them with?
I would say most of the time they don't actually know what they're missing. What they're looking for is some kind of an X factor, right? They're like, well, let me say this. I think that one of the biggest critiques that I have of agencies when it comes to a situation where they're like, oh my God, we need this client. We have to have this client, or we can't afford to lose this client and we're in review. Is there's two things. One is there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the physiology of decision making that they don't quite get. And the second critique is I don't think they understand the game that they're playing as well as they think they do. And so those are things that we try to help them understand, at least at a high level, when we're going in, if we are participating with them in a pitch. And there's a pretty ornery thing that we can do that we can talk about later if you want, that has a very good success rate of helping agencies win pitches.
Yeah, you said a couple of things there that are really intriguing to me. What is the physiology of decision making? How would you describe that?
Well, most people don't understand decision making really at all. They think decision making is there are multiple choices and we're going to make a selection, but they don't understand the neuroscience behind actually how it works. It's much more of a biological process than it is a free will process. So let me give you an example. Let me leave it with this. There's the only reason I know this is because there was this dude named Antonio Damasio who was a neuroscientist at USC actually, and he was working on a book which is called Descartes' Error. If you want to read it, good luck. But he was studying a group of people that had a very specific type of brain trauma, either through tumors or blunt force contact, car accidents, those types of things. And the electrical signals that the pituitary glands released were being disrupted, and they were basically emotionless, right? The cognitive function of their brain, so their frontal lobe, well, there's two most really important parts of the brain, right? The frontal lobe of the neocortex and the limbic system. So what he found is that the people that really had perfect cognitive function but lacked a lot of the emotions, as we would call them, really, which is just, I won't get into that, but they couldn't make even simple decisions, like what time the meeting would start or what to eat for breakfast. And so he was studying this group of people and found that maybe the way that we look at decision making and how the brain actually works, we typically, before this work that he did, we always there was like this left brain, right brain thing, like, oh, well, we have this balance of logic and reason and emotion. We make decisions. And he basically debunked all of that. And so essentially we are incredibly emotional to the extent of every decision for the most part that we make enters and exits through the emotional sector of the brain. And so, um, if you aren't making, um, if you aren't generating emotional appeal or emotional resonance, you are losing. Like you are literally defaulting someone into the part of the brain that functionally cannot make a decision. And agencies do this all the time. Actually, RFPs force them into that. It's like we call it the RFP trap, right? Like check all these boxes, and then if you check all the correct boxes, the agency feels really great about their chances, right? And it's like all you did was just pigeonhole yourself into a position of losing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're talking about this because I think it doesn't get there's precious few people that bring the emotional element into sort of this B2B sales context. Rory Sutherland is one that I like a lot. But if anything, one argument that I've heard from him is that it actually has more of a need in a B2B context because there's kind of this like coalition building aspect where you have to get multiple people on board. So to bring this to a question, I guess, like thinking about whether it's a formal RFP or just a multi-stakeholder sales situation, how are you sort of taking some of those lessons you've learned about the importance of emotion and bringing it to like a group of buyers as opposed to like a lone consumer doom scrolling at 10 p.m. or whatever it might be?
Yeah. So, um, in order to do that, you have to understand what the game is that you're playing. So, like I said earlier, they don't understand for the most part, like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Most agencies say, we're trying to come in and we're going to show them how great we are. We're going to show them that we're amazing and all the work that we do and all this. So, probably I think the stats say approximately 70% of agency pitches are them talking about themselves. It's the worst thing you could do. That's not anything novel, right? Everybody kind of knows that, but they still do it anyway. Uh, the the thing that they don't realize is that human beings are essentially they're risk engines. So what what is happening in a pitch is they're not trying to find the boldest, most uh, fantastic agency partner. They're trying to find someone that will de-risk their situation, and that's the thing that they don't really understand. So instead of talking about yourself and saying, look at our awards, by the way, if you think people care about your awards, there's an article on our website called Your Customers Don't Care About You, where we mathematically prove over a period of 10 years of studying this that talking about things like awards is actually losing you more pitches than it's winning you. So instead of talking about yourself, put yourself in a position where they can see that you know how to de-risk their situation. And it seems like there's so much rule following when here's what we want, here's what we ask. What they say that they want and what they actually need to hear are different things. And so, what if you want to build a coalition? Human beings are different, right? They're all different, and if you think you're going to get everybody on board, you're wrong. So, the one thing that works every time is looking at what is the one thing they all have in common, and it is the situation. Show them that you understand the situation and you know how to take the risk out of that situation, and you're way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, I was just nodding my head the whole time because we've used that term de-risk a lot in the context of business development, right? Where it's like you're an agency trying to get a conversation with whatever, a CMO, let's say. And that person, and especially the gatekeepers guarding that person, are thinking in terms of risk. They're not thinking in terms of gain. They're thinking in terms of just the normal everyday risk where it's like, am I going to waste my time with this person or get annoyed or whatever. And then there's the later funnel risk of, am I going to get roped into something that's just a bad fit because I haven't properly vetted this agency or whatever it is. So for us, de-risking is, can you get there through a referral or through a community or something you have in common with them, as opposed to the usual cold outreach. So I really like that framing of de-risking. I'd like to bring this a little bit more to what you guys do. So if there's this coalition and the issue is they're all facing the same situation, can you talk about the work you guys are doing to get the research to get people to nod their heads and say that's right, like this is the situation and these people understand it?
Yeah. So typically that starts with the question process. Most of the time when you go through and you say, oh, you respond for questions, it's all logistical barrier stuff, which is the wrong approach. The best thing you can do with the questioning section of an R, if it is an R, let's specifically do an RP, but if is to find out what the business situation is. Ultimately, there is a business problem behind whatever it is you're trying to solve. And that business problem is not always explicit, right? What's happened is the organization has translated a business issue into some kind of uh, uh, a list of marketing, communication, advertising activities that they believe will solve the situation. One of the first things I look for is if the business situation is not evident, I'm going to ask questions that are going to allow me to figure that out. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable because the person that's answering doesn't know the answer, which is actually really good because that means they have to go involve somebody else in the organization, which increases your probability of getting in front of another potential decision maker and increases your probability of getting a one-on-one communication with somebody else other than the person that's responsible for responding. Does that make sense? So that's that's the most important thing that you have to get right. Once I understand the business problem, now I know how to actually go and do work behind it. So we do something with our agency partners we call pre-work. Very clever. But so most people hate pre-work, but we found that it's very effective if it's done well. So once we understand the business challenge, we'll go and we'll use our system to come up with a series of value propositions that we believe could potentially solve what they're asking. In the details of the RFP, they will typically tell you um, some of the pain points. They don't necessarily tell you what the outcome or the reason that they're trying to, or what the outcome they're trying to get to, or the reason that they're doing this, but they will give you some specific pain points. That is key to understanding segmentation. How do I break audiences into pieces for learning? And then we'll go into field. We'll do a quick test. So let's say that it's for a university or a sporting goods product or a cell phone case. It doesn't matter. So we'll go into field and do a really quick test and value test some ideas, and then show them some segmentation work, and that typically shows them something they can't unsee. And that is one of the most important things you can do in a pitch. Show the people something that they cannot unsee because they will always come back to it when they're doing their internal deliberation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it's sort of like it's making yourself invaluable in the same process by giving them a perspective they didn't have before, as opposed to getting sort of shoehorned into just being somebody that's shoveling coal into a fire, right? So that makes sense to me. If I can kind of put our audience in my head, I think there's probably agencies listening that are like, whatever, we do paid media or we do programmatic or we build sites. It's really hard for me to get access to this bigger, wider business problem because a company's put out the RFP for this one compartmentalized thing. I guess what would you say to that agency? How do you sort of help an agency like that navigate to the bigger business case, if that makes sense?
Well, first of all, that's not an excuse. Um, just because someone says build me a website, that I mean, it's one of the build me a website is one of the biggest excuses for we have a business problem that we don't quite understand that exists, right? Because they think that if we refresh the site and we have new navigation and UX and it's better, then our conversion rate will increase, right? There's typically some kind of a business case that exists that they don't understand, and that's what you have to get to. If I was a web builder and someone said, "Build me a website," I would start with the exact same question every time. Why do you need a website? This one looks fine. Which sounds completely insane. Why would you say that? But it's because you've disarmed them and you want to get them to start talking about like what is the point here? And if you can especially get that one-on-one communication that's not published, you have an absolute leg up in the process. So they say, well, um, you know, our funnel measurement says that we have, attrition on the contact page. All right. Why do you think that is? How do you know that? Did you benchmark that against a peer article? Like, how do you know that it's not good? It may be perfect. And they'll tell you essentially, if you ask enough questions, what the issue is. And now you know exactly what to solve. And everything should be framed around that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to kind of dig into like what research looks like these days and how you're sort of going about it. Like, I think that I'd love to hear a little bit about once you've gotten past the question phase where you're learning about, the agencies asking questions of the brand or whatever it is, what's the next step from there? Like, are you actually going out there and collecting raw data from customers or doing focus groups? And I'd love to hear like what role is AI serving, these research tools and what are the limitations that you're seeing now?
Yeah, let's start with the latter and move backwards. AI has instantly disrupted tabletop research. So secondary analysis is now extremely easy to do. Um, because you've got the fancy smart machine that can aggregate all this entire world of existing data and do it very quickly and easily. So anybody that's in the secondary research space is immediately disrupted. Um, that's fine. Um, the next phase is synthetic audiences, where we invent people, we give those people behaviors and personas, and then we sort of turn them loose in an artificial environment and then try and do primary analysis against those people. That will be the future at some point. Um, all of the existing analysis that's done so far, it's not even close. Um, so we have a long way to go when it comes to, do I have to do research or can I just type my question into an AI system and it'll give me the response? I think we're way farther away from that than people think. Um, because human beings are extremely complicated. And most of the time, the AI systems are essentially just aggregating behavioral data. And so it can make a prediction around why somebody does something, but it doesn't understand the motivations and the drivers as to why. And human beings are linear in many respects in that they their behaviors are results of their feelings, right? I feel a certain way, therefore I take an action. It's not the inverse. So we start with, well, let's understand their feelings. If I can understand why somebody feels a certain way about a product or a service or experience or a situation, I can be pretty predictive around what their behavior is going to be. And so that's why we focus on figuring this out. And that, well, I don't know, does that dovetail into my background? Does anybody care? Nobody cares.
Mm,
Uh,
I care, Grant. Let's talk about your
it,
background.
it, uh, I was a mergers and acquisitions analyst. So the only reason I'm in this field is because I was the the one that was given the research to analyze to bring two companies together to make sure that the integration plan didn't sink the acquisition.
Hmm.
And so, it was one of those classic, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something that tells us. And what we figured out is that um, when you go through due diligence in an acquisition, if folks have been through that before or walked through it with clients, they know everything gets a microscope. And the one thing that we noticed, and this is about 15 years ago, one of the things that we noticed is there was one very specific thing that no one was measuring, and that is why the hell are our customers here? We knew that they were there. We knew how long, we knew how many SKUs they bought. We could even be predictive around what SKU they were going to buy next, but nobody knew why they were there. And if you don't know that, you don't really know that much. And so we said there's got to be a way to kind of figure this out. So that's what led us down the dark path of like decision physiology and psychology and neuroscience and why do people choose this over that? And
Yeah,
that's what we
to
build our
double click
system
on
around.
that a little bit, like, I guess at a surface level, it sort of seems obvious. Like, why are the customers there? Well, we sell shoes or whatever. So if they're on our site, they want to buy shoes. Um, are there any, not to put you on the spot, but are there any examples you can come up with where there's been surprises, where you're digging into the research and people are learning things about their customers they wouldn't have thought normally?
I'm surprised every time. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
what we found is that you have to follow a scientific method in order to do this properly, which means that there are limitations. Okay, so um, for instance, we use well, I'll touch on this first for a second because it's interesting. Um, we use a method called elicitation, and it was developed by an FBI special agent to use for interrogations at the CIA. And they still use it today because it works incredibly well. And what they found is that if you ask someone a question, you get a garbage answer. And the reason is because if you ask someone a question, a little security guard, kind of that's what they call it. Security guard pops up in their head and that you get a very framed response. So, if you've seen the old like movies where were you last night? They don't do that. It's not a real thing, right? What they'll do is they will make a series of statements. And when you make statements instead of ask questions, people are disarmed. And so it's the easiest way to get the truth out of somebody is to make a statement. So instead of being like, where were you last night? It'd be like, man, I was out late last night watching the game. You probably were too. And then like people will talk. And now I know what they were doing last night, and I didn't have to ask them a question. So they train CIA and interrogation operatives to. There's all kinds of cool things that
Yeah.
situations they put them in, to where they have to solve for situations without asking questions. And so we use that same methodology. And so what we'll do is we give a series of statements based on the value propositions associated with a product, right? Not features. If you're testing features, you're dealing with the non-decision making part of the brain. You have to walk a product through its value prop to the end customer. So we do somewhat get limitations, but imagine if I said to anyone and I said, "Hey, tell me the 20 reasons that someone would do business with you." Okay. It's a lot harder than you think to come up with 20 things, right? You come up with the first 8 pretty quick, and then it gets slow. So if I'm forcing you to come up with 20 and then I say, "Okay, one of these is going to be in first place. It's going to be the most emotionally resonant value proposition. Which one is it?" So we've done this process about 800 times in various capacities with all kinds huge companies, tiny nonprofits, governments, cities, anything you could think of. And guess how often, when I give that situation, guess how often people get the answer right?
Very rarely.
It's about 6%.
Yeah.
6% of the time. And I play the game too, and I'm not right very often either. And I do this all day, right?
Yeah.
It just shows how it's incredibly challenging and inherently unknowable information, right? And if you're at an organization, the reasons that people buy from you are completely skewed based on who you are. You live inside the four walls of the company, right? And you know that a certain process is critical in order for your product to be made the way it is or whatever. But uh, you don't really understand how the consumer translates that value.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. And just a quick to go back to the elicitation part. You've probably seen this, but what I remember was the story of like the KGB going to a Navy base and then just saying to these drunken sailors, like, "Ah, I've heard the submarines there only go this fast," and then they're like, "No, they go this fast," and like So it really does work. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. They call them
Yeah,
near truth statements.
near truth statements. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never thought of using that in a research context because I guess the assumption is you're doing research, people are friendly, you're not trying to break into a Navy base or something, but you still get that same resistance. Why do you think that is? Because you'd expect people to be open to sharing once you're above board and there's nothing proprietary and so on.
Yeah, so in a research context like this, if you're trying to sell a product, it's not because they're trying to be deceitful. They will be deceitful, but it's mostly because the methodology, like the questions that whoever has put the survey together or whoever is asking the questions, it's their fault. They're the ones that are creating the environment that generates deceit. So it's not like they want to deceive you. They may not know the answer. So what our system does is it allows us to identify what the motivations and the emotional resonance of those value propositions are. So I don't need to ask them. So a lot of times people will look at our stuff and they go, "How the hell are you going to figure all this stuff out with just these questions that you're asking?" And they're like, "Well, because it's it's an art and a science around how to do this correctly."
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing you were saying is there's these 20 reasons or whatever it is that people might buy, and we're not very good at guessing what they are, and then the results might surprise us. And I've been thinking about this a lot with these industries that are going to supposedly be disrupted by AI, right? And I think a lot will. But I think what's sort of interesting is like there's a lot of industries that are masquerading as one value prop but are actually another. Like the one that comes to mind, I think most prominently in my mind is like consulting, like McKinsey or something, where everyone's saying, "Hey, McKinsey's dead. They're going to get disrupted by AI." But the reality is, you hire McKinsey as like insurance. It's like an ass covering mechanism, so that if you're a CEO, you can make the decision you want to make, and then go to your board and be like, "Well, I ran it by McKinsey." Um, so I guess I'm trying to bring this to a question, but I guess the thing that I'm thinking about is like, does that crumble when the facade of what it actually is crumbles, or does it maintain itself even in a world of AI? So does that make sense? Is there anything you're seeing in your world that reminds you of that?
Yeah, no, it's 100. Well, that's always been a thing, right? Like you never got fired for hiring McKinsey is a saying, right? It's an idiom,
Right.
and for a reason. Will it go away? Probably not. Here's the reason why I think that. The reason it doesn't go away is because structurally there's something called a customer adoption or customer adoption curve, right? So who's it going to die with first? The early adopters, right? So the early adopters are going to go, we don't need McKinsey. But you still have the laggards and the late majority and even the early majority who still are. And so they're going to lose. They're going to lose people from the left moving to the right, but there will always be people that will want McKinsey. And by the time uh, things really get disruptive, McKinsey's going to figure out another angle to come in and work on. Does that make sense? Like they'll find a way to pivot and reposition themselves to be more valuable to a broader audience.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think, the McKinsey is the kind of the big example of that, but then there's probably other things that we think it's one thing, but it's actually another that we'll have to sort of like figure out as, the technology
Well,
goes
it's
through
funny.
the
Most
processing 1,000.
most businesses are insurance businesses
Yeah.
masquerading around as something else.
That's interesting. Any other examples of that you've seen?
No, but well, yeah, I'm sure if I've thought about it for a while, but that is really common. And here's the reason why. It's not as though, well, first of all, any business model that functions like insurance is brilliant, right? Let me hold your money, and in the event some certain low probability event happens, I'll give some of it back to you, right? That's a pretty good business model considering it's a completely made up thing, right? Like banking is made up and financial advisory. These aren't real things, they're made up. And so if you can if you can get your business to operate like an insurance company, that's a pretty good business model. But the reason it works is because of how the brain operates. It is a risk avoiding entity. The brain is not only, well, it's first of all, it's very lazy. I would say it's the second laziest organ in the body next to the appendix, but it exists in many respects only to keep you alive. right? Like, why does differentiation work? And everybody say, we want to be differentiated. We want to be differentiated. Well, you should, because the brain is physiologically uh, wired to identify things that are different. It's a risk detector. I want to be able to, if I'm looking and I'm scanning trees, I need to be able to identify if there's something different because it might be a threat to me. So that's the reason that differentiation works. It's hardwired into our DNA. So that's why insurance models work, because you're de-risking a situation.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I think a really major one is like the trend towards specialization, right, across the economy, but especially with agencies. And I'm super open about this, but I've always said like for what we do, there's no reason it couldn't work for any B2B enterprise, but I have to be able to communicate that I understand the agency world, and like 80% of it is marketing. And it's the same for our clients that are selling to whatever laboratories or CPG or whatever it is. Like they all know that they could do the same thing for anyone, but a lot of it is like it's de-risking things for that buyer, right? In that conversation. That's such a big part of it. So we're kind of getting towards the end of our time. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet?
Um, that's a good question. Is there anything you haven't asked me yet? I mean, in the context of what you want to know, well, I don't know what you want to know, but
Let's say
uh,
in the context of agencies trying to make biz dev more repeatable and so on.
well, maybe you haven't asked me. Let me put an exclamation point on something. If you want to win more big pitches, it's almost like there's a simple formula. One, stop box checking. Box checking makes you feel like you're doing the thing that they want, but you're actually putting yourself into a box of sameness. Stop doing it. It's a trap. The second thing is figure out the business problem. If you don't figure out the business problem, your likelihood of winning dramatically decreases. And if you do understand the business problem, your probability of winning goes through the roof. You're going to make the final cut. And then the last part is ditch the logic, stop talking about yourself, and make the emotional connection. Show them that you understand the situation, build this rapport. And when you do that, they will go, man, they really understand this. They've done this before. That's the McKinsey effect. You can create that McKinsey effect by just letting them know that you understand their situation. And instead, agencies bloviate for half the time around case studies that are immaterial and look at our creative and all this stuff. And I'm telling you, none of that crap matters.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think that's strong. And to kind of close things out, like, can you talk a little bit about what are you guys working on over the next few months? What are you excited about?
Well, we have a cool gig because we don't we don't work on the same thing. We work on crazy different stuff all the time, which is perfect for my ADHD. Um, most of well, actually, here's something good. So one of the things that we have been working on recently is we've been meeting with our agency partners, talking to them about the future of agencies. The future of agencies is very challenging right now. One, because of what's happening at the holding company level and the acquisitions where you have strategy companies, large accounting firms, they're purchasing agencies and they're relegating strategists down to smaller clients, and they're bringing in teams of MBAs to do strategy. It's not because they super respect agencies and their work. It's a vertical integration strategy with the intention of commoditizing all of the things that agencies do. And if you're an agency, this is a really big threat. Now let's layer on top of that AI. So now AI is naturally commoditizing things. We have an agency partner that has stopped doing SEO as a service. Now all they're doing is they're going in, they're charging clients a one-time fee to build an AI agent that is going to be a 24-hour SEO employee, and there's no more SEO as a service, which is a pretty evergreen. It's been a pretty evergreen, product that is consistent cash flow for agencies, and it's going to be gone soon, along with several other things. So how do you combat that? Um, So what we believe is that probably the only way to do it is to go actually fight in the realm that these consultants, in the accounting firms, the McKinseys, the Bain Capitals, fight their game, but at a lower level. So, for instance, if you're an agency, instead of being dictated the budget, you should be you should be trying to figure out, look at the business case and go, okay, well, this is a go no go strategy, or this is a vertical integration strategy, or this is a potential acquisition, new market entry, whatever, and then help do the research and provide the business expertise in that area. Because and agencies get really uncomfortable with that because they typically have degrees in the humanities, right? And they don't necessarily know how to deliver a go no go strategy because they've never done it before. But they're a lot closer than they think. So what we've been trying to educate our agencies on is, hey, here's how you can use um, somebody like us or other types of partners to elevate your deliverable so that you can actually counteract and pivot a lot of the things that are commoditizing the work that you're doing currently.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and it reminds me of a lot of, I think Robert Rose's smile graph, right, where it's all the leverage is at the top part of the value equation, planning, and then back at the other end with measurement, and then that circles back to planning again. So I think that's a really good note to end on. And with that, Grant, where could people go to follow what you're up to and get in touch?
Well, our company's called Proof Positioning. There's an agency page in there. If you want to go look, you can see the kind of work we do with agencies, and um, we'd be happy to talk to you and help have a conversation and help you out if you need it.
Awesome, we'll get that linked up. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you.